I'm Leena Augimeri. I'm the Director of Scientific and Program Development at the Child Development Institute in Toronto.
I'm Margaret Walsh, Manager of Research and Evaluation at Child Development Institute.
The Earl PC stands for the Early Assessment Risk List Pre-Checklist. And what it is, it's a concern checklist to help individuals such as policing, those in education, to identify kids that they're concerned about. And not only does it identify level of concern, but it also helps them to then decide, based on their experience, what do they think that child and family could benefit from in regards to services and where that can be in their own community.
And the Earl PC is really the newest member of the risk assessment tools, the Early Assessment Risk List, in which we have tools for the boys and girls. There's the Earl 20B and the Earl 21G, and now we have the Earl Pre-Checklist.
And I guess the last point of that piece of it is that the Earl PC was actually developed out of a need. So it wasn't that we thought initially that would be something that would be really important. It was actually identified from those in policing and education that they felt that the original tools, which were the risk need assessment tools, the Earl 20B and 21G, were a bit too complicated or to be able to complete because they were real thorough mental health clinical tools. And so they decided that they asked us whether or not we could take the Earl 20B and 21G and create a kind of a checklist or something that was more user-friendly for those who may not have as much information to complete a full battery Earl 20B or 21G. Key aspect is to remember is there's no such a thing as that one risk factor is the most predictive. There are numerous risk factors, and you have to take into account the child, the family, responsivity, community, for example. But for example, in our tool, in the Earl tools, items that fall under the child aspect are anything from, for example, antisocial values and conduct, for example, or peer socialization, peer supports.
Exactly. And as Leena said, there's no one risk factor that predicts. It's usually in combination with other risks. So we do know that there's certain clusters of risks that help to predict outcome. For example, we know about girls that is a cluster of risk that involves continuity of care. So this is about how much disruption do they have in their lives, if their families have been involved in criminal activities, if there's been any evidence of abuse or trauma, if there's been any issues around sexual development for girls. So these are this is a really important cluster of risks that we know that may predict negative trajectory for girls. And for the boys, we know it more around items like the family and child clusters all together. So again, it's not one particular risk item, it's how it combines together.
But what we do look is when we look at the risk items, exactly what Mark said is the cluster, but there are specific risk items or risk factors that have been identified in the scientific literature as more prominent. So for example, looking at their peers, looking at the school and academic functioning, as well as how they're getting along with other peers and kids. There's also another prominent one is, Mark said, is caregiver continuity. How many people have come in and out of that child's life, as well as responsivity items. For example, how responsive is the child going to be to get help, and also how responsive is the family going to be to get help. So there are specific risk factors, but like we said, there's not one. I think it's an interactive piece that we're learning as we do more research in this area. So the Earl PC, how it can really help communities or help community partners get children to the door is what it was all designed for. It was designed to help those to be able to identify level of concern or just concern, how much concern they had about a particular child, be able to kind of give them an understanding of kind of risk factors, what things they are concerned about under child and family, and then once they do that, they're able to say, is my concern, is it a low concern, a moderate concern, or a high concern? And based on that, what is it that I think this child and family could benefit from? Is it anger management? Is it family counseling? Is it community supports, like involving them in recreation activities? And then based on that, you then say, okay, where in my community can I access services for this child? So it really was developed specifically for that as a concern checklist, but also to mobilize those who come into contact with child to be able to be proactive in their development and needs to say, I can connect them to this organization in my community.
Yeah, and the form itself allows for that. There's identification around what types of services would be linked to the concerns, and it really is designed to facilitate the appropriate referral.